Great, fantastic. Well, today we're with Rafael Ortiz, who's written 3 books on Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus, the hero, defending Columbus from modern day revisionism. That's kind of the book we're going to focus on today. And Columbus Day versus Indigenous Peoples Day: the truth behind the anti-Columbus movement. And then you wrote a third book, Rafael, Christopher Columbus and the Christian Church, and why he matters to believers today. Now, I look forward to reading those 2 books as well, because these are fascinating topics. But before we begin, what got you so interested in researching Christopher Columbus and writing about him?
2016 maybe or 15, I saw some claims about Christopher Columbus that I never heard about, saying that he was a rapist, that he was mistreating the natives, that he was evil. And that was the meme. It was designed to request people or tell people to rename Columbus Day, that we should rename it to something else. And I never heard of anything like that. So I decided to read the primary sources, and from the first page of the journal, and anything that I read from him, I could see that what they were saying was not true. Eventually, I made this page on Facebook, which I still have. It's called Official Christopher Columbus on Facebook, and it was designed to be educational. I am from Puerto Rico. I was born in Puerto Rico, and Columbus is mentioned in our anthem. My understanding was that he was a friend to the Tainos, which were the natives of Puerto Rico. He discovered Puerto Rico in his second voyage, 1493, I believe, and he named it San Juan, and eventually, and then the capital was Puerto Rico, but then the name switched later. Like Puerto Rico became the name of the island, and San Juan the name of the capital. So eventually, I wrote the book because I could not find one that debunking the new modern day revisions. So that's why I decided I couldn't find it. So I decided to write the book myself.
Well, the revisionism nowadays really is now the narrative.
Yes.
It's changed. It really has. I mean, my wife tutors kids, and they hate Columbus now too, because they think he's this genocidal maniac, and that's been the established narrative. When I was growing up, of course, you begin to see the change of it beginning also during that time. I'm a little bit older than you are, of course, but today it's Howard Zinn and others will say, "Oh well, we're trying to give you the other side of the Columbus story," but that's not the case anymore. The other side has become the main side. So it's important that what you're doing right now to try to set the record straight.
Yeah, and I went back to that meme because I was wondering who is saying all these things, because I don't see any of these things on the primary sources. So they were mentioning Howard Zinn, James Lowen, and some other people that are not primary sources. And I noticed that they were all people, none of them were primary sources. They were not people from the 15th or 16th century. They were all people from the 20th, 21st century. And most of them, they're anti-American and they're revisionists. I found out that spread everywhere. It was not just Facebook and the memes there, but also YouTube. And I saw the reaction from young people saying that now that they know the truth about Columbus, they didn't want to celebrate Columbus or any other holiday, American holiday. So that's when I knew, okay, this is not about Columbus. This is about America. And I had a feeling that they will start with Columbus and then move to other things, which they did in 2017. They started with Columbus, vandalizing the statues of Columbus, and then the Confederates. And then they link Columbus with the Confederates, even though he had nothing to do with it. But then from there, they moved to George Washington and Jefferson, and claiming that the Declaration of Independence is racist, and our anthem is racist, and everybody else is racist in America. All those all white people who were founders of the nation, and then they start to. And also, I noticed that the same group, they wanted to rename not just Columbus Day, but also Thanksgiving Day on Thanksgiving Day. And the claims are similar. They say that the white people came here, the Europeans, and they came here to enslave the natives and bring diseases and commit genocide and steal the land and so on. And that's why they wanted to rename. And then from there, they changed to the 4th of July. They want to rename the 4th of July to something else. So that's the false narrative that they established.
I mean, Columbus Day is just the beginning of it all, really. What their the intentions are is to change all these holidays and take down statues, not just of Columbus, but of the founding fathers and anybody who they deem as villainous or wrong in history.
And like I said in my book, it's a clever tactic because most people know little or nothing about Christopher Columbus.
You know, it's interesting you said that, because you say that in the beginning of your book, Christopher Columbus, the hero, defending Columbus from modern day revisionism. There's a quote right in the beginning, really, when you say this, and I think this is very true. When it comes to Columbus, we have two camps: one that knows little or nothing about Columbus, which is why so many people are indifferent toward him and what he represents. And then there's the second camp that think they know something about Columbus, and now they want to make sure we spell the word discover in quotes. I think that was very prevalent of what you wrote.
Yeah, they don't even know what that word means. Columbus, they say that he discovered America or that he didn't discover anything because people were here. But then you see when they talk about other explorers that came after him, like Amerigo Vespucci or Juan Ponce de Leon or Vasco Núñez de Balboa or any other, they all discovered this or that, but Columbus did not discover anything, even though the explorers that came after Columbus, they came because of Columbus. Columbus made possible to come here, and everybody else came here. They usually say that Columbus never reached North America or United States, what is today United States, but they ignore that America is not just North America. It's also the Caribbean. It's also South America. It's Central America, and also I tell people that Amerigo Vespucci, whom the name America came from, he neither discover or reach North America. He never reached what is today United States. So I mean, if that's the requirement, then I guess America didn't met that standard either.
Yeah, right. He went to Venezuela, I think, and mostly South America, didn't he? Vespucci. Yeah, so you're right about that, right? You say in your book also, which I think is very true. Also, you start out and you say, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. And sadly, the lies against Columbus and the anti-Columbus Day movement are growing and becoming mainstream. And this is very true. So a lot of these things that they're accusing Columbus of really are just plain old lies.
Yeah, and also people are confusing the revisions with the news that came years ago that historians found a document about Columbus claiming that he was mistreating the Spanish colonists, and that's why he was arrested during his third voyage. And that part is true, meaning that he was arrested, he was removed from office. But the part that is not true is that he was guilty. He was never charged of anything, and the people who removed him, they were charged later for mutiny. And it's true that the historians in Spain, they found that documents. Anybody who had read the story of Columbus, we all know that part of the story, that he was falsely charged and removed. But now they found the documents, and this historian now is coming because they found the document to that person. That means that Columbus was guilty. But I say that's like saying that somebody find the documents, like anybody who was accused in history, because we have heroes and saints through history who have been slandered and killed or imprisoned but under false charges. Just because you find the documents doesn't mean that they were guilty of anything. That's why I'm writing my new book. It's called Christopher Columbus, the Hero Part 2, and it's about that. It's about that dossier that they found in the 2000s, and I'm trying to debunk all those claims.
Well, the fact that you can speak Spanish and read Spanish, of course, I think it must be a big help to you in going to the original sources and reading what they wrote in your native language.
Yeah, and but most of the basic primary sources are also in English too. Anybody can read it, and you can even find them for free on Google Books, Project Gutenberg, or you can maybe go to your favorite local public library and find some of those sources. That's the way that I did the beginning. I just went to my public library and read the Journal of Christopher Columbus, translated by John Cummings. And later I download some of the other versions by other people, because those books are they are free on their public domain. History of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas, even though it's better to read in Spanish. And Peter Motter is another primary source, but you can find the book for free on Google Books. Volume 1, The Orbe Novo is the name of the book. I think that's Latin or something. It means the New World. That he's one of the best too. And there are other ones I don't remember. Okay, also The Life of the Admiral Christopher Columbus by his son Ferdinand Columbus. That's a good
Ferdinand,
one.
right?
That one is not. That one is not free though. Go ahead.
All right. Was he? Now that was his. He had two sons, right? Was that his? Which son was that?
Yeah, that was
that
Ferdinand. Ferdinand.
Was it his first son or second son?
His second son.
I think. And he went with them on the fourth voyage or the third voyage. I forget which one it was, but
yeah, the fourth one.
So he wrote this book after the life of the Admiral Christopher Columbus by his son Ferdinand. So that was written, I guess, after he passed away, of course, Columbus. And then he also has another source, Antonio de Herrera. Yeah.
Yeah, I added him, even though he came much later, but he was like the first non-primary source, but he lived kind of close to that era, and he's still considered one of the best ones. So that's why I included among the primary sources. There was another one, Oviedo, Historia General by I think it's Rodrigo or Fernando. Many of those people, they have similar names, but his last name is Oviedo. But I did not include it in the first book. Later, I use him as a source or as part of my bibliography much later, because I made in 2020. My first book was published in 2017, and then in 2020 I decided to make like updated versions of each of those three books. So I added a little bit of things, like new things in it, and that's one of them about Oviedo. So he's another one too. And also there's another, I don't remember because I don't have actually I have the book here. Another person that he lived in that era, and he wrote the history of, okay, I got it here. Let me see, Andrés Bernaldez. He also was, he lived during those days, and he wrote Historia de los Reyes Católicos, the history of the Catholic kings, and he included the story of Christopher Columbus.
Yeah, it's amazing because you list these sources. These are original sources. And when you go to them, his biggest antagonist has got to be Howard Zinn. When you look at his bibliography, I think all he mentions really is the De La Casas journal. And everything else that he mentions, everything else in his bibliography. And he only devotes, 3 or 4 pages in his first chapter, People's History of the United States, where he condemns Columbus. But when you look at his bibliography there for that chapter, it's just, I think De La Casas is the only one that he has listed. And then the other books that he lists are just his contemporaries, people who, and they're just writing about the natives mostly. And they're very critical of just, colonialism and post-colonialism. But none of the things that you have here as sources, he doesn't mention any of that. And I find that really bizarre because, it's like anything else. You have to go to the original sources to understand what's really going on.
Yeah, and also somebody can say, well, but that was Columbus writing about himself. But the deal is that the letters of Columbus and the documents were for the eyes of the queen only, and they were not supposed to be for the public. And also the same with Peter Martyr. That's why I say that both are the best ones in that sense, because they were writing things as things were happening. Columbus was writing like his first voyage as a journal, so he was writing as things were happening. And Peter Martyr, he was writing to people in private, close to the time that things happened. That's why, as I say, I included Oviedo later, but I chose not to include it in the beginning because he has a few errors here and there, because he was not familiar with some of those primary sources. But again, as I say, Columbus and Peter Martyr, they were writing things, and those things were private. They were for the eyes of the queen only. It was much later that people start to write things in public, like his son, Ferdinand Columbus. But even his son, he never published a book. He died, and then, like a few weeks later, after he gave the script to his sister-in-law, he died. He never published a book. It was published later, and then we have Bartolomé de las Casas, which you mentioned, and he himself believed that Christopher Columbus was a hero, and he's one of the best when it comes to the history, because he have all those primary sources. Most of the sources that we have is from him, and like the transcripts from the journal, that's him who made it. On the documents, that's him who published it. He also used Ferdinand Columbus's book as a source for him for the second voyage, but also he has some criticisms about some of the abuses that some Spaniards committed against the natives, and that's where you see Howard Zinn picking and choosing the parts that he likes, and then he attributes those abuses to Columbus, even though Bartolomé de las Casas was talking about other people, and he was using another timeline of history, but they're now using the wrong timeline and attributing those things to Christopher Columbus.
They could like cut and paste. Basically, they're taking what he might be saying. He might be writing about something else, and they're taking that and they're applying it to Columbus based upon maybe a page or more than that further before than you read. And that's kind of what they're doing. I noticed that you're right about that, because that's what you really see in the Howard Zinn accusations and other things. It's really this cut and paste job that they're doing regarding some of these historical documents.
Yeah, he also. It's just pick and choose, and also he sometimes mistranslated things that Columbus said. I'm talking about Howard Zinn. Like, he said that Columbus said that the natives, and I even wrote a chapter about it too, an entire chapter about it. Let me see. It's the one that is called "They Would Make Fine Servants." Chapter.
Right. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
But Columbus did not say that at all. Let me see. Let me load here. What Columbus said is that he was describing the natives, and he did the same everywhere that he went. He was describing everything, the landscape, their customs. And that's actually I believe that's in the first chapter of Howard Zinn book. And he put several sentences together of things that Columbus said in different times under different contexts. He said that they were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms, talking about the natives, and do not know them. I'm going to jump here. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. And then he jumped and says, with 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. And from that, they are using that to imply that Columbus was thinking about slavery, meaning that he was describing them as well built, like, because he was thinking, Lord, they would make good, slaves. But the deal is that he caught the whole thing, because Columbus, again, he was describing everything that he saw, and he said that they were good people, and they would turn into Christians easily, because one of the purposes of Columbus's voyage was to bring Christianity. And if they become Christians, and he believed they were easily, that they would turn into Christianity, then that means that he was not thinking about slavery, because under Spanish law you cannot make Christians slave. So he doesn't know what he's talking about. He also edits some stuff too, because he's trying to portray the natives. I'm talking about Howard Zinn, what we call the I forgot that it's a propaganda that they've been using, the legend of the myth of the noble savage, where every Indian, every native was a peaceful person. So he takes those lines where Columbus talking about them being peaceful, but what Columbus meant is that he was received peacefully by many of them. But he in the same sentence, he also said that they have scars in their bodies because people from other lands were coming, invading the lands and taking them as slaves. See, he was picking and choosing to establish a false narrative. That's what Howard Zinn was doing in his book, and everybody else who came after him too.
Now, when Columbus is describing the first natives, I think he's describing your ancestors, correct? Because you're Tainos, aren't you? You have Tainos blood or native blood in you, don't you?
Yeah, that's the pride of Puerto Rico. If you go to Puerto Rico, that's what you're gonna see in every souvenir store about Taino this, Taino that. People, even there are some people like artists that have used that name, like Taina, or people have used it as a nickname, like Indio. I knew somebody that's what they call him, Indio. I even have friends that they have used like little names of some of those chiefs too in the past from the history of Columbus. So yes, that's why I wanted to see about the story of Columbus, if he was a friend to them or he was not. And as you can see, he was a friend to them. And we know that the Caribs were, because not everybody was the same. As I said, he was received peacefully, but in some lands that was not the case. Like when he went, I think it was Jamaica, they attacked him in the beginning, and Cuba, there were some people who had tried to attack his sailors. And then we had the Caribs, who were a different tribe, and they were invading the Caribbean, and that's where the word Caribbean comes from, Caribe. And that's also where the word cannibal comes from too.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what they were doing. They would invade the Caribbean and kill the Tainos, rape the woman, castrate the man, kill babies. And that's why Columbus made a peace treaty with them, especially with this Taino chief in the island of Hispaniola. His name was Wakanagari, and he made a treaty to protect him from the Caribs and from his enemies.
He was when you grew up in Puerto Rico. What you knew was that he was a friend of the Tainos. He was I think you mentioned in one interview that he was actually what you knew of him growing up in Puerto Rico was that he was a hero of the Tainos. Is that right?
Well, I knew that he was a good man. That's all that I knew. Like most people, we know like snippets, like little bites of history. We don't know the whole thing. I just knew that he discovered America, and I knew the story of the first voyage, and I knew that he was a friend to the Tainos, and that's it. And that was enough for me.
Well, you say just give me. I want to ask you really quick. This in your book after you say about how when people lie, if a lie often it becomes the narrative. And then you go into some publications. You've mentioned Snopes, New York Times, the Biography Channel, even MTV News. Which, by the way, we shouldn't dismiss too much because so many young people get their news from those kinds of venues. And MTV News, for instance, said that Columbus was a genocidal rapist. But let's go with this. I guess the main claim today against him really is that he was an enslaver. He enslaved the natives. He was a slave merchant. I think there was also that claim. Is that true? And tell us the opinion of your opinion about that based upon your research.
That's something that is false, because it's impossible for Columbus to enslave everybody. That's what they're trying to imply. They also try to imply that he invented slavery. It's a lot of implications, and they are not even logical because that's impossible for him to enslave so much people. They do the same with the claim of genocide, which I know is something impossible for him to commit, for one man to kill so many people, millions of people. And then they say that he just discovered one tiny, insignificant island in the Caribbean. So how he can kill so many people? And
Did
about
he, did he, uh,
slavery,
did he enslave anybody? Did he enslave a
in
small
this
number of people?
in the sense that they're trying to imply, the implication there is the African slave trade. That's what they're trying to imply, that he's the one who brought Africans and so on. But that's not true. And also, he made, as I said in the beginning, he made a peace treaty with Wakanagari. So when he returned for his second voyage, what he was doing was rescuing Tainos from the Caribs, and sometimes he would burn their canoes or destroy their canoes, so the Caribs would not stop invading the islands. And sometimes he would take them as prisoners of war and he would send them back to Spain, and that's the only slavery kind that he was allowed to practice. And that was temporal, and it was suspended on his third voyage. But people don't know that because they don't read.
But that was normal back then. I mean, in a way, it's kind of what happened during World War II, didn't we? When you defeat the enemy, you'll take them and you put them. Back then, at least, that was more common, where they would enslave those that they conquered. Many societies did that, and you look back at some of the more recent wars. They put them in they take them and put them in a camp, but they'll have them do work there. You can make an argument that's even akin to slave labor, but that was common. What he was doing was not uncommon. Basically, if he defeated an enemy in the field, he would, as punishment, they would be the slaves of the victors.
Yeah, but he also sent a letter to the Queen saying that he wanted them to be treated, that they receive good treatment, that they learn Spanish, so they can learn the gospel of Christ, meaning that he wanted for them to turn to Christians too, which means at some point it would be suspended. And he said many times that he was going to restore them somehow, to liberty again. So it was temporal. It's not the same. The deal is that when people, and I talk about that on my second book, that when people hear the word slavery in America, what they think is racism. That's what they think about. And they don't, but the deal is, if before, the Europeans were enslaving other Europeans, and Black Africans were enslaving other Black Africans, and Asians were enslaving other Asians, and the indigenous people were enslaving other indigenous people long before there was a crossover. So people don't care about that. They only care when the white man started to enslave other people from other skin color, because that's when they can use the race arguments. But that's not even true, because again, the Spanish people, they were marrying the natives from the beginning, and it was Columbus never used force unless it was the last resort. He never used force against anybody, whether it was European or native. Back then, tribes would align with the Europeans so they could fight other tribes. And that happened also with the Pilgrims later. Other tribes would align with them so they could fight together against other tribes. So it had nothing to do with racism. But you will notice that people won't care about Blacks enslaving other Blacks unless there is white people involved in it. I say it also in my first book that the first person that owned a plantation in North America was a Black person, and there were thousands of people who owned plantations who were Black and who also owned Black slaves. So my question is, were they racist? Right. And I say it does, and that would make everybody else racist. That would make white people racist when they enslave other whites, that would even make God himself racist, because there are some forms of slavery that God allowed in the Bible, but under the context of conquest in the land of Israel. So the issue of slavery is not as black and white as people think, and people are picking and choosing the things that they wanted. Not every slavery was the same. Historically, when we are using history, even on the Constitution, when the slavery is abolished, there is one of the amendments says that, let me see, I think I got it here, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, meaning that going to jail is a form of slavery. So the 13th Amendment of the Constitution abolished slavery unless it's for crimes, because going to jail is a form of slavery. There are many forms of slavery. Not everything was like what people think, that it was innocent people being kidnapped and sold and being forever and ever being slave generation after generation. That's not true. Not everything was like that. But again, we don't have slavery anymore, because the people that came with Columbus, they brought the Judeo-Christian values to the New World. And some of them, starting with Christopher Columbus himself, he did not like how some Spaniards were mistreating the natives. That's why he punished some of them. Columbus did punish Spaniards, and that's why they rebelled against him, and they made false charges against him, and that's why he was removed during the third voyage. But after he was removed, the priests who were in Hispaniola, they didn't like what they were seeing, so they complained to the king about the abuses, and then later they started to preach against slavery. But it wasn't because of slavery, it was because of the abuses. So they thought, yeah, because even the priests, they own slaves, because it was normal. But they say, okay, so they're gonna abuse people, but then maybe we should not have slavery at all.
Yeah.
So they start to preach that, okay, if you own a slave, then you're in sin, and it's a big sin. So they start to preach about it. That's on my third book, by the way, that story. And then later Bartolome de las Casas came with his books, and people start to preach against it. And their argument was that the natives, were people created in the image of God. So that's a Christian doctrine, because back then they believed in gods, the pagans and the natives. So when people say that, talking about human rights, they say that, no, but we are human. Yeah, but that's not the full sentence. The full sentence is that we're human, created in the image of God, not on the image of the gods of the Greeks or the Vikings or the Aztecs, because the gods, for example, of the Aztecs, they demanded, and the Incas, they demanded human sacrifices. But the God of the Bible, he is different. Yeah. So the whole thing started to change, and everything that, people judge the past according to modern day opinions. We judge the past according to the rules of today, or the way that we think things today. But we ignore that the things that we believe today came by the ideas that people from that era start to develop. Like now we don't believe in slavery, but that's because of the people who came with Columbus start to preach against it. Right. They talk about decolonization, because they say that we need to decolonize. Right. Because they say, okay, if Columbus came during the era of the kings and queens, that means that if you support Columbus, then you are in favor of imperialism. But that's not true, because later, eventually, the people who came here, they developed other ideas, and now we are the United States of America, not the United States or the United Colonies or the United Empire of anything. And people don't know this, but in the South America, after the revolution in the 1700s, in the 1800s, they wanted to do the same, and they became independent too. But they want to name it all the states in South America, the United States of Columbus.
Oh, really? Okay. Huh.
Yes, that's
Cool.
on my third book.
That's
So
great.
that's why Columbus was so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
He never represented he Columbus never represented abuse or oppression or racism or anything like that. Columbus was always a symbol of being a hero.
That's amazing. Rafael, I gotta have you come back on the program and talk more with you. We have about a half hour for this one. We're down to the last few seconds actually. But I want to thank you so much for all the work you're doing. You're all over the place, helping Italian Americans, but really just Spanish Americans. Everybody really should embrace what you're doing. Trying to set the record straight on Columbus. So I hope to have you. Will you come back again and we can talk about your other books that you've written and some more insights because you have tremendous material and tremendous insight. We want to share that with everybody.
Yeah, I'm available anytime that you
Great.
want.
That's great. And I found your books by typing in Columbus by Rafael, not necessarily Columbus by Rafael Ortiz, but by Rafael. And that's kind of where and I'll put links for people to go ahead and find your books. And I recommend everyone really to pick up the books that you've written. Christopher Columbus, The Hero, Defending Columbus from Modern Day Revisionism. And I thought that was an excellent book. And I look forward to reading Columbus Day versus Indigenous Peoples Day, your second book, The Truth Behind the Anti-Columbus Movement, and Christopher Columbus and the Christian Church, which is also a fascinating topic. And the tagline then was why it matters to believers today. And I'll have links for everybody to go ahead and try to purchase these books, also with your social media site and other things as well. So I want to thank you very much for joining with me today. And I'm going to have you back on again. Maybe we can talk longer and get more details.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you very much, Rafael. That's Rafael Ortiz, folks, and he's doing a great job for us. We all got to follow his lead in reading and researching about our hero, Christopher Columbus, to set the record straight and combat the revisionists and those that want to argue against him and change his holiday. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. Thanks. 40.